1 year, 365 days. That's how long BYU has officially been members of the Big 12 Conference. Where do things stand for BYU after that time? Where are they going in the future? Well, I think that they're on the up and up, but we're talking about it all on today's show.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who we like to call everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This is your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars, and we're brought today by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more, and as, of course, the summer rolls on, FanDuel is hooking up all their customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everybody every single day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. As I mentioned in the open, it's been exactly 1 year since BYU held that big shindig in Provo to officially celebrate them entering the Big 12 Conference. And I will say right at the outset of this conversation, I believe BYU Athletics is in a better place than they ever have been in their athletics history, going back well over 100 years. Today is the best day in BYU Athletics history. Why? Well, I frankly believe that everything that BYU has aspired to have in their athletics department is now available to them. If you want to look at football, they now have the door open to them to play in the college football playoff. There are very, very strong indicators and just straight up stories that BYU's national championship win in 1984 essentially forced the establishment, as it were, to ensure that would never happen again. BYU is finally having the door open to them again as members of the Big 12 Conference. You want to go to men's basketball? Kevin Young has absolutely elevated what was already a very, very strong men's basketball program, and they look poised to challenge for the top half, if not the overall Big 12 championship next year, if the talent base on this roster is to be believed to be legitimate. Anything else you want to look at? Women's soccer. I know that they look like they may have a little bit of a retooling year this year, but I don't put anything past Jennifer Rockwood. She has created a true national powerhouse at Southfield for BYU. Look at the volleyball programs. Look at track and field, cross country. We'll talk about an incredible story from the track and field world involving the Olympics here in just a little bit in James Corrigan. You look at by any measure, I feel like for BYU Athletics, and that goes both on the field, court, whatever the playing surface is, and also just off the field with regards to BYU Athletics administration, the overall money they are generating, also that they're raking in from media rights deals. I think by any measurable metric, BYU Athletics is in a better spot today, 1 year into the Big 12 tenure, than they have been at any point in well over 100 years of intercollegiate athletics. You want to argue with me? Feel free, jump in the mentions. I'd love nothing more than for you to argue with me on this, but I believe that BYU has achieved and is living its best life right now. You look at it, BYU football. Yes, I know there's been some consternation with the 5-7 season a year ago, but I can tell you, having conversations involved with that program, they are absolutely intent on proving all the naysayers wrong. They believe they got something special cooked up for this upcoming season. Now, what does special mean? Is that 6-6, 7-5, 8-4? Do they completely shatter all expectations and push for 9 or 10 wins? Only time will tell. But I can tell you, people inside that football program, they are upset with the storylines, the overall tenor from Cougar Nation about what this football program entails. They are sick of hearing how bad they are, and they want to go out and prove people wrong. You look at BYU basketball. Quite frankly, BYU basketball going into the Big 12 Conference, all of us, yours truly included, believe they were going to be one of the programs that had the biggest uphill climb to compete in the best basketball league in the country. What does Mark Pope do? Goes out and puts together an incredible season. They finished 5th in the Big 12, get a 6th seed in the NCAA tournament, and by far exceeded any expectation anybody had for them. Well, then Mark Pope leaves, and you think, okay, now they're going to have to go right back to the drawing board, and it's going to be an uphill slog once again. What do? Quite frankly, they elevate the program by hiring Kevin Young, and all he has done is bring in more talent, better talent than Mark Pope had at any point during his tenure at BYU. It is absolutely insane to consider where BYU basketball stands today as it's compared to where it stood a year ago this time. I would say that for a number of these programs for BYU Athletics overall in their athletic department. Tom Homo is BYU Athletic Director. He's got to be breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief. He is taken BYU from the Mountain West Conference into football independence, moving the Olympic sports into the West Coast Conference, and then moved them once again, all of them outside of men's volleyball, from the WCC/football independence into the Big 12 Conference. He has done everything in his career, and he's been at BYU for a long time now. Are we pushing 20 years now for Tom? It's an incredible thing to consider what he has accomplished as BYU's athletic director. So you can say that BYU is what it is, but I would say that they are in as good a shape as they possibly could have been. And the funny thing about this is, being in as good a shape as they are, in my opinion, looking at the Big 12 right now, doesn't mean it's going to get any easier for the BYU Cougars. I look at everything that BYU went through this past year. Only one conference title. That came in women's cross country. Diljit Taylor, who, by the way, might be the most underrated coach on BYU's campus, continues just to churn out All-Americans, Olympians, and conference titles like it's a routine thing, and doesn't matter what conference they're in. But it's going to be tougher sledding for BYU Athletics across the board as members of the Big 12, because they are competing against the who's who of college athletics. I know that the SEC and the Big 10 have stolen a lot of the headlines in college athletics, obviously on the football front, by gathering the collection of brands and names that they have in the football realm. But the Big 12, it's a hyper-competitive league, and BYU's right there in the thick of it, and that should excite you as a Cougar fan. I didn't have much of an agenda to talk about on today's show other than to elaborate on why I believe BYU is in as good a position as they possibly could hope for right now, even if it's not necessarily going to feature the same amount of quote-unquote winning as it has shown previously. Remember, BYU for years in the WAC, the Mountain West, even in the West Coast Conference era, they won conference titles with relative ease in numerous sports. That's no longer going to be the case in the Big 12. But the funny thing about this is, I think if you ask any of the long timers, and I term that a long timer, let's say Jennifer Rockwood, she has coached BYU throughout its entire Division I history in a women's soccer program. She had them in the WAC, if I recall correctly, the Mountain West, West Coast Conference, and now in the Big 12. I think if you were to ask her which of those leagues winning a conference title in would be the best in your mind, she's probably going to say the Big 12. Because the competition level, when you can go out and beat the top tier of competition you possibly can face, and you win it all against that competition, there's nothing sweeter than that. I know that the West Coast Conference put its best foot forward for BYU. I know that the Mountain West and the WAC, and way back, if you want to go all the way back to the Skyline, the Mountain States, whatever you want to term it, BYU has had stern competition before, but they have never faced this level of competition across the board in any sport. And yes, there are going to be sports that are going to have an uphill climb. I look directly at what BYU baseball and BYU softball are facing right now. They have lost, in theory, maybe their three best single players across those two programs, and they've jumped ship to the SEC. It's going to be very tough for Trent Pratt and Gordon Eakin, it feels like, to compete at an elite level in the Big 12 Conference. But I would tell you that they, even though they're looking at what they're facing as members of the Big 12 Conference, they would tell you that they are in as good a spot as they could be with regards to being members of the Big 12 Conference. So let's celebrate the fact that BYU Athletics, Brigham Young University, is doing exactly what it aspired to do when it chased membership in the Big 12 Conference and ultimately landed the big fish they've been chasing for well over a decade in football independence. It's been a really, really fun year, and it's only going to get better. Congratulations and welcome, by the way, to Arizona State, and our arch rival, University of Utah, to the Big 12 Conference in addition to Colorado. It's fun to have them in the conference. It only makes it all that tougher to compete year in and year out. But I think across the board, BYU Athletics will be better for the competition they will face in the Big 12 Conference, both today and on into the future as members of this great league. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we're going to talk about BYU's little announcement they're going to be revealing at some point today. New uniforms for BYU football. What are the chances it's the 1996 version? What are the chances it's the 1998 bibs? We're talking about all that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Of course, I love sports. You guys know this. I do this on a daily basis. I work in sports radio. I also do this podcast on a daily basis. Well, guess what? This year, the sports may not be sportsing as hard as I want them to be, but FanDuel is helping you have fun no matter what. Because whenever you want to have some fun, you open the app and dream up any bets you want. And anytime you're in the mood, you can have some fun with our friends at FanDuel. And this summer, all summer long, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. You heard that right. There's something for everybody all day, every single day, all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockdown. Start making the most of your summer today. You want to believe BYU basketball? You got 55-1 odds for our friends at FanDuel when it comes to winning the national title in basketball. You think BYU football has got something cooked up and they will surpass the over-under of 4.5 wins this season? Go place the bets today with our friends at FanDuel. It's FanDuel.com/lockdown to get started once again and take advantage of those daily booster bonuses from our friends at FanDuel today. Once again, that's all courtesy of your friends over at FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I want to encourage you, if you're sick of watching ESPN or Fox on your TV and having to turn on the volume with all the shouting going on those networks as they embrace debate, as they like to say, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, my friends. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every single day, bringing you the biggest stories without all the screaming going on the other networks. Locked On Sports today, bringing you chemist analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. It's also available on the Amazon Fire TV channels app as well. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, let's talk about BYU's announcement. Now, there were rumblings of this last week, and I told you guys out of the BYU Media Golf Tournament, I asked some people about BYU's rumored new uniforms coming for the BYU football program, but nobody was talking. They were not willing to give me anything. I said, you'll just have to wait and see. Now, the announcement is officially coming today, July 1st. Now, let me also acknowledge that some of you may be watching this after that announcement has happened. But here's the deal. There are very, very strong indications that this could be the 1996 throwback uniform from that obviously incredible year as BYU went 14-1 and played in the Cotton Bowl that season. Could that be the uniform? Could it be a throwback to, who knows, 1998 and those ill-fated bib uniforms? Now, okay, I also will say this. The bibs have been outlawed, or at least were outlawed by the NCAA because the color scheme and the bleeding of the not the royal blue, it was then navy blue onto the bibs actually turned like purple. But it seems like this is a cool time to announce this for BYU. Obviously celebrating 1 year in the Big 12 Conference, trying to conjure up some excitement for the BYU football program. I completely understand why they're doing what they're doing, but at the same time, count me a little apprehensive that BYU might butcher this a little bit. And what am I worried about? Well, I'm worried about them maybe going with like an anthracite or a gray uniform. I don't want to see that. I just don't spoil what you have as a good thing for BYU football. I know that they have debuted blackout uniforms and they've worn some special ones over the years that are throwbacks to eras past of BYU football. I'm totally okay with that. But you don't need to be the University of Oregon here when you're BYU Athletics. I believe that a strong brand for BYU football is what they already have right now with that royal blue and white combo. Why screw with it? So that is my sincere hope. If I'm placing bets on what the announcement of these new uniforms are going to be, it's a throwback to the 1996 and that drop shadow look from 1996. It's one of the best looking uniforms in BYU football history, and it absolutely fits with the current aesthetic for BYU with regards to promoting the royal blue. Now, obviously, Kalani Sitake still likes to mix and match his navy with his royal. Okay, that is what it is. They call it the Kalani combo for a reason. But I think if BYU does this the right way, it can only enhance this upcoming season. But let me also acknowledge this. Don't wear it for just one game. Come on now. We can do better than that. Are you going to throw it back to 1984? It's the 40-year anniversary of the 1984 team. Now, the uniforms today and the uniforms then are fairly similar in many respects. It wouldn't take a lot of tweaking on that. Are you going to pay homage to that national championship team? Maybe so. But don't screw with with a good thing if you're BYU. I know I'm saying this the day that they're announcing the uniform, so that's probably been months in the works. And obviously, if they do tweak some stuff, I have nothing but complaints on my end. But I think the BYU football, they're becoming more and more aware that they have a true brand and they don't need to mess with it. Think of the great brands in college athletics: USC, LSU, Alabama. Look at the Notre Dame. They have iconic looks, and they don't vary from them very often. I know that it works for Oregon. Obviously, when you have Phil Knight as your main booster, and obviously he's an alumnus of the university, and oh, by the way, he built this company Nike that produces a lot of the uniforms. As BYU is a proud Nike school. I get that Oregon, it works for them to have the aesthetic where they can wear a gazillion, infinite amount of different uniform combinations at this point. I don't think that works for BYU. You don't need to be the Skittles of the college football universe. And I say that as a very proud Utah Jazz fan, because if you look at the Utah Jazz history, the only uniform combinations or colors that they have not worn are probably pink and brown at this point. And even then, don't give them any ideas under Ryan Smith, because they very well may execute those at some point. I think that BYU is in a great spot, BYU football in particular. And with new uniforms, yeah, pay homage to the eras past, but do not screw with the current look you have. You've got an iconic look. Teams and people across the country know what BYU looks like when they show up to play against the Cougars. Do not mess with that. Pay, like I said, pay all the homage you want to 1996 and 94 team. Even 50 years ago, BYU played the first ever bowl game against Oklahoma State. They have plans to honor that team, obviously, during the Oklahoma State game this fall as well. You can pay homage to those teams. You can throw it back. If you want to go back to the old era, there's one that was in the 1940s where BYU wore an orange gradient uniform. Great. Have fun with that stuff, but have that be the one-off in that respect. If you want to wear a royal blue throwback from the 1996 season, I'm all for it, because it doesn't mess with the current look for BYU football. You can wear those all season long for all I care. I'd be totally okay with it, because trust me, the 96 season is seared in my fan memory forever, because that was the year that I really latched on with what BYU was doing and became very aware of the power that BYU had. And obviously when you went 14-1 that season, yeah, that's going to do that for a lot of people. I don't think I'm alone. I think there's a number of you out there listening and or watching this who'll be right there with me. You're of my era, of my age. I'm in my upper 30s. So that's right in the wheelhouse of when you latched on with BYU, and those are iconic uniforms in BYU football history. So yes, celebrate the past. Obviously, it's a big part of what makes college athletics great. But don't mess. If you're BYU, do not mess with a good thing. You got a good thing going right now. So we'll see what happens today, and we'll have more of a breakdown for you guys on this tomorrow. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we'll wrap up today's show. We're flipping over to the track and field world. Obviously, the Paris Olympic Games, not too far off. An incredible feel-good story from BYU from this past week plus for the BYU track and field program. Who is James Corrigan, and what has he accomplished in a BYU uniform that I think should be celebrated more than it maybe has been already? Maybe it's being celebrated, but I haven't seen it. We'll talk about that next as we continue on right here on Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you've not done so already, please join our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. It's a great way to interact with the show, support the show, and at the same time, get all the updates on BYU sports that I can pass along to you guys, insider tidbits and the like. Get a 14-day free trial to see if it's the right option for you by clicking the link in the show notes below, whether you're watching this and or listening to it, and hope you guys will join us. It gives you updates sent to you via text message. It doesn't get much easier than that. So hope you guys will sign up today. Once again, a 14-day free trial, just $5 a month afterwards, and join us on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, James Corrigan. Some of you may have not have learned his name until this past week, and I will admit I had not learned his name very heavily until this last week myself. But the story is absolutely incredible what this young man has accomplished. Now, he is a 3,000-meter steeplechase runner for BYU, and I don't say runner, but he's a 3,000-meter steeplechase athlete for the BYU men's and women's track and field program. And if you want to label BYU anything right now, you should probably call them Steeplechase U. Courtney Wayman and Kenneth Rooks are on their way to the Olympics representing BYU track and field in that very event. But James Corrigan at the U.S. track and field Olympic qualifiers stunned the entire field by finishing in third place. Now, that would obviously traditionally the top three finishers get the ticket punched to the Olympics. Now, you have to run what they call the Olympic Standard Time. Now, the Olympic Standard Time this year for the steeplechase was 8 minutes and 15 seconds. Well, he ran 8:20, was it 8:21 in the Olympic trials? Yeah, 8:21.22 in the Olympic trials. So more than 6 seconds off of that Olympic standard. Well, Ed Eyestone, the legend himself, obviously the director of track and field for BYU and James Corrigan's coach, made some phone calls, and they found a meet in Pennsylvania, of all places, to let Corrigan go run a specially made event to run the 3,000 meter steeplechase and hopefully get the Olympic standard time in that race. The problem was there's a heat wave over there in the Northeast, over Pennsylvania, and they were worried that the conditions may not let him run that. Now, the other thing about this is that his run 6 weeks ago, Corrigan's best time in the steeplechase was 8 minutes and 46.6 seconds. More than 30 seconds off the Olympic standard time, 31.6 seconds if you're keeping track at home. And he has dropped his time by a whopping 33 seconds since then to make the Olympic track and field final here. And the incredible part was he headed into that race on Saturday. Kenneth Rooks, to his everlasting credit, actually traveled with Corrigan to be, they call him the rabbit, to be the pace setter for this race, to help Rooks, have Rooks lead the way for Corrigan to run this race and hopefully reach that number. Well, Ed Eyestone, in his infinite wisdom, decided I'm not having Rooks be the rabbit. They brought another guy in from the Air Force Academy to be that rabbit for him. And then Corrigan gets out and absolutely tears up the track, finishing in 8 minutes, 13.87 seconds, absolutely shattering the record and the Olympic standard time he needed to hit. I know that seconds are all the rage in track and field. Incredible stuff. And the other thing is he broke the record set by two-time national champion Kenneth Rooks with that 8 minute, 13.87 second 3,000 meter steeplechase. It's absolutely incredible. It's the 13th fastest time in the world today. And 6 weeks after being more than 30 seconds off the standard time, James Corrigan can call himself a United States Olympian. It is an incredible story. It shows you kind of what the Olympic spirit is all about. Now, the Olympics come around every 4 years in the summer games, obviously the 4 years in the winter games. BYU is sending 6 athletes from their track and field, their famed track and field program, to the Olympics, and they're going to be competing mainly in the distance events. It's an incredible thing that BYU has built, but the story of James Corrigan stands out more than most to me because of what he accomplished in kind of persevering through a month and a half where he was probably way off the pace, finds his stride, goes to Eugene, Oregon to participate in the Olympic qualifiers, stuns everybody by finishing in 3rd place just behind his former teammate, Kenneth Rooks. Kenneth now is a professional runner, obviously, and then has to travel across the country. They said it was in the mid 80s with 60+% humidity. Those are just brutal running conditions. Trust me, I am far from a runner. I can tell you that running in 85 degrees and 66% humidity sounds just downright awful. But what does he do? He goes out and absolutely owns the moment and punches his own ticket to the Paris Olympic Games. So James Corrigan, yeah, he may not get the same household recognition as some of the BYU football and basketball players will, because they are featured more prominently and obviously idolized more far heavily than track and field runners at BYU are. But I think we can all celebrate what James Corrigan accomplished as a member of the BYU track and field program. This is an incredible thing. This is a young man who's going to have a lot of expectation heaped upon his shoulders once he returns from the Olympic Games. I wouldn't call him a contender to win the steeplechase. I would actually put Kenneth Rooks far more in the mix to win a medal in that event, because he's a 2-time national champion. But when James Corrigan returns from Paris and obviously enrolls in school this fall, he is going to be one of the guys people talk about in the track and field world and say, what can he do for an encore? Obviously, it's the cross country season, and then it'll go into track season. But this is a really, really cool story. And I want to celebrate what James Corrigan has accomplished for BYU, because I think it screams everything that we want BYU athletics to be, everything we want Olympic spirit, the spirit of the games to be in the Olympics. And hats off to you, James Corrigan, and best of luck. Go tear it up in Paris. We'll be rooting you on, obviously, from back here stateside, but really, really cool story to see him break through and obviously now be living his dream as he punches his ticket to head over to the City of Light, as they like to call it, in Paris, France. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the podcast. A big thank you to all of you for your support of the podcast. As always, it's a fun time. A new month is here. Independence Day coming up in just a few days' time. So it's a fun time of year, but a big thank you to all of you who like to call everydayers, obviously. Thank you for checking this podcast out every single day. And obviously to all of you who make it your first listen of the day, hats off to you guys and appreciate all the support as always right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.